Hi, welcome to a Fingernail Fixer video. Today let's talk about troubleshooting for Dazzle Dry nail lacquer. One of the first things that you want to look at is if your prep work is done correctly. Let's take a look at the nails. The first thing you want to focus on is, have you removed any cuticle from the nail plate itself? And then have you used anything like an oil or a lotion on the nail? And if so, you want to make sure that you're washing the hands with soap and water to remove any of that oil off of the nail, as that can cause your polish to peel off. So make sure you just use a little bit of soap and water with a scrub brush and scrub that off before you use your Dazzle Dry prep. Then you want to come in with your Dazzle Dry prep and actually use a good amount of that on your lint-free wipe, saturated. You don't want it to just be a little bit barely wet. You actually want to have enough on there that you can get the nails really well saturated. So if you look at that, you can see the middle is nice and wet, but the edges are all dry. That means it's not saturated. Here you can see the whole thing is nice and wet. So we got a good saturation. And something else you want to be really focused and clear about is that you are moving the pad as you scrub each nail. So we're going to go down and scrub the folds and scrub the tip, and then turn the pad so that I'm not scrubbing that nail with the same section of the pad. Turn it again and scrub the nail, getting down in those folds. Scrub the tip, turn the pad. And depending on what you're using, so if you're using a larger square, a smaller lint-free square, whatever you're using to scrub with when you scrub with your prep, just make sure that you're using a clean spot on each nail so that you're not taking any dirt or oils from the surface of one nail and transferring it to the next. You want to make sure each nail gets a nice clean spot on the pad, and that you're really getting down in those little grooves on the sides of the nails. If you were doing this with a client, then you would be able to use your own fingers to pull those sidewalls or lateral folds out of your way so that you can scrub the sidewalls of the nails and get that nice and clean. Another troubleshooting step is to make sure you're not using anything besides the Dazzle Dry prep. If you're using something like acetone, alcohol, Band-Aid, Bondex, Scrub Fresh, etc., you can actually be over dehydrating the nail, and Dazzle Dry polish doesn't like the nail to be over dehydrated. It likes the nail to have a little bit of moisture in it, and so the Dazzle Dry prep actually has some moisturizers to it. You can see the nail isn't getting as chalky as it usually would with some of those other prep products. So you want to, oops, I'm going the wrong way. You want to make sure that you are leaving the nail with that little bit of moisture that the Dazzle Dry prep will give it. Scrub that last nail, and then they are ready to go. And you can go in and trim any like little hangnail pieces in that before you start your polish work, because if your polish gets on any of those little pieces that are kind of exposed once you do that scrubbing, then those will draw the polish over onto the skin, which can also cause some chipping or peeling. And once you kind of clip those away, you could take your prep and just scrub anywhere that you accidentally touch the nail with your skin. Or if you manage to clip those off without touching the skin, you can go ahead and move in with the application. So that is a little bit of the troubleshooting. Let's take a look at some more aspects of the troubleshooting when it comes to application. Another troubleshooting step can be, are you getting your base coat warmed completely clear? As you can see, I have had my base coat in the water long enough that it is completely clear. Here's an example of just partially warming the base coat. It's still got some cloudiness to it, which means all of those polymers are not as warm as they should be, which means it is not going to perform the way that we want it to. Something you can also do is warm it too much. It should not be put in the microwave, should not be put in a hot towel cabinet or on top of a hot towel cabinet or any other heating element. Just putting it in a bowl or a cup of hot water is all that you need to do to it. And here is how the base coat starts out in the beginning. So here's how your base coat starts out. Here's one that's still a little bit milky, and here's what it looks like when it's completely clear. So we want to make sure we're getting that base coat all the way to its completely clear state before you start applying it to the nail. Another issue that you want to look at is if your lacquer is getting a little bit thick, you can apply Revive to the top coat or the color. Do not apply it to the base coat, only the top coat or the color. And you want to apply around 6 to 8 drops at a time. Shake it up really well and then see how it's doing, and you can add a little bit more if it needs it. Let's do a base coat application and talk about some troubleshooting things that you can look for with your base coat application. One of the things is going to be making sure you apply your base coat as if you're applying a red. The base coat should go on in a fairly medium application, making sure that you're not touching the skin and that you're leaving a small margin around all the edges as well as sealing the end. That seal on the end is going to prevent the base coat from, or the polish itself actually, from peeling. Make sure you apply that base coat so that it's not touching the skin. You're sealing the edge so that your color will last longer, and you're getting a nice layer over the entire nail. And simply apply that base coat as if you were applying a red. And if you happen to get the base coat on the skin, remove it right away. Don't wait until you've done all 5 nails, all 10 nails. Go ahead and clean it up immediately. And the way that you can do that is with a little bit of acetone and a brush. Just dip your brush in the acetone, then dab it off so that it's not soaking wet, and clean up anywhere that you got a little too happy with the base coat or that the base coat accidentally flooded. And then you're good to move on. If you wait until the polish is completely dry, what can happen is it'll be a little bit more difficult to clean up, which makes you kind of scrub at it a little bit, and then you end up removing more than you intend to. If the base coat is still wet, it's really easy to just clean it right up. You want to make sure that you allow the base coat to dry to a matte finish before you apply the second layer of base coat. So we'll finish applying this to all 10 nails and then take a look at it to see if it's matte before we apply the second layer. As you can see on this first hand, it's starting to come to a matte finish. The second hand that just applied is still pretty shiny. So you can see the difference between that more dull finish and that just applied shine. Especially if we compare the pinky that it was first applied to and the thumb that it was last applied to. You can really see that finish difference. Now, it's not going to have a totally matte, like a matte top coat. It's just going to be a more dull version of the shine. And this hand is ready to go with that second layer of base coat. If you have applied, oops, as I turn it in the light, I can see there are little stripes of shine, so it's not quite ready. I'm going to give it about 60 more seconds and see if that is what it needs, because you want to be patient. If you give it that extra 60 seconds between layers, that's going to make all the difference between that 5-minute dry time at the end and having a few dents here and there and polish that didn't completely dry. Once that first layer of base coat is that matte finish, you can come in with your second layer of base, and the same application applies. You want to make sure you're sealing your end, keeping everything off the skin, applying it just as carefully as you would apply a red, and watching that if any kind of floods over onto the skin, you go ahead and clean it up now instead of waiting, because it's much easier to clean it up in the moment than waiting for it to get that little bit of dry time. And if you have any excess, go ahead and use your brush to scoop off that excess. You would go through and apply that base coat to all 10 nails. And that is your troubleshooting for the base coat. Making sure that you keep it off the skin, making sure that it's all the way clear, and making sure that you allow it to dry to that slightly matte finish before you apply the second layer. Then making sure you allow the second layer of base coat to dry to that slightly matte finish before you apply your color. Once your second layer of base coat has dried to that more dull or matte finish, you're ready to apply your color. Some troubleshooting tips with your color are going to be making sure that it's not contaminated. Contamination would be the colors kind of coming out in a stringy consistency. Making sure that it doesn't have a thick viscosity when you're trying to apply it, because you want to apply it in about a medium layer. If it has gotten thick, you can just use a little bit of Revive to bring it back to the viscosity that it should have. You want to make sure that you're keeping it off the skin. If you'd accidentally get a little bit of it on the skin, you want to clean it up right away. And just using a little bit of acetone on a brush to just wipe that right up is really helpful. And cleaning it up right away makes it a lot easier to clean up, because if you let it get dry, then you kind of end up trying to scrub at it a little bit, and then it gets stubborn, and then you're more likely to mess up more of the nail versus just cleaning up that little bitty spot that you wanted to clean up. And that is very, very frustrating. So just a little bit of an acetone on the brush, dab the brush off on your pad, and then go in and clean up that one little spot right quick. So you're just applying that medium layer of color, making sure that it's not on the skin as you apply. Pull off any excess with your brush if you feel like you get it a little more than medium thick. Seal the edge when you apply so that you're getting that little bit longer wear. Some additional troubleshooting when it comes to your color can be the condition of the natural nails that you're applying it to. If the nails have had enhancements on them that were removed incorrectly or applied incorrectly and the nails have been damaged, then that foundation is not healthy. So the nails are going to need anywhere from 3 to 6 or 6 to 12 months to grow out back to their original condition before it's a healthy foundation for the polish. Or if the nails just are genetically not healthy, then they may also not wear the polish as well because they're not a good, healthy foundation. If you find that they have a lot of grooves in them, that's where you can come in with the foundation base coat and fill in some of those grooves to get a smoother surface finish. So there are some tips and tricks for troubleshooting with your color. When you finish the application of the first layer of color, you want to make sure that you allow that to get that slightly dull or matte finish before you come in and apply the second layer of color. You also want to make sure that you're not waving it around or blowing on it, because any artificial means of attempting to dry your Dazzle Dry color will actually reduce the wear time, as well as making it kind of look a little bit ripply or not as smooth as the finish should be. So you want to just lay your hands down, leave them be, or ask your client to be still and not blow on their nails, even though it's really tempting, or wave them around the air, or any of those super fun things, and just hang out and let the polish air dry naturally. Because when you see how this one is already starting to get that dull finish, when you apply the layers in the way that they're meant to be, you can literally set a timer at the end of the service for 5 minutes and it will be completely dry. Seriously, it's so awesome. So hopefully some of those troubleshooting tips for the color come in really handy. Let's take a look at some troubleshooting tips for the second layer of color. One of your troubleshooting tips for your second layer color is making sure that first layer color has that slightly dull finish. You can see on this hand, the first layer is still pretty shiny. This one has that slightly dull finish. So you really want to make sure that you have that, and that's one of your troubleshooting tips for your second layer of color. The rest are basically a lot of the same as the first layer of color. Make sure you're getting that medium layer of coverage. It doesn't need to be super thick, but it also shouldn't be too thin, keeping it off the skin. And just going through, making sure you're not using any artificial means of drying it, sealing the ends, kind of catching any spots that you missed with the first layer, and going through and doing all 10 again, just like you did with the first. And the second layer doesn't need to be any thicker than the first. It just needs to be that same medium thickness, and then make sure it dries to that nice, slightly dull or matte finish before you apply the top coat. Apply that to all 10 nails, and then you're ready to give it about 60 seconds or so to dry and apply your top coat. The final stages of troubleshooting are going to be in your top coat. You want to make sure that you're applying your top coat also in a slightly generous layer, a little more than the medium that you did with your color. You want to make sure that you're kind of floating the top coat on and not digging into the color, sealing the edge without touching the skin. This is where it will come in really handy if you've left a slight margin between the color and your skin, so that it's much easier to seal the edges of the color without touching the skin. Just gently glide the top coat on and seal those edges. If your natural nail is genetically a little damaged, maybe you have naturally brittle nails or they're a little peely, then you may choose to have 2 layers of top coat. You would want to apply those one after the other instead of waiting for the top coat to dry. Another troubleshooting is if you find that your top coat kind of gets not as shiny after several days, perhaps from soaps or hand sanitizers, or you're not being good about wearing gloves when you do household chores and such, then you could clean your nails off and apply a layer of base coat and then a layer of top coat to kind of revive the shine. Some additional troubleshooting for top coat is make sure you are not using any dry acceleration sprays, drops, forced air dryers. Don't blow on it. Don't wave your hands in the air. Any kind of accelerated drying process that you use can affect the wear time negatively. It also will affect the finished look. You're not going to have that smooth, shiny look. It's going to get some funky little ripples in it that are not as pretty. So I hope this troubleshooting video for Dazzle Dry helps you. If you have any further questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments. Thanks for joining me, and I hope to see you on another fingernail fixer video.